The Tonight Show studio was empty now, the audience seats dark and silent, the cameras covered, the lights dimmed to a single spot over Johnny Carson's desk. The magic that had filled the room an hour earlier, the laughter, the applause, the electric energy of live television, had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the faint smell of cigarette smoke and the echo of jokes already forgotten. It was November 1972, and Dean Martin had just delivered one of his trademark appearances. He'd stumbled onto the stage with that famous lazy gait, traded quips with Johnny, sang a song, and charmed 30 million Americans before wandering off into the wings as if he had somewhere better to be. The audience had loved it. They always loved it. Dean Martin made everything look effortless, and that effortlessness was exactly what people craved in an increasingly complicated world. Johnny Carson was still sitting behind his desk. He hadn't moved since the cameras stopped rolling. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded, and he was staring at the empty chair where Dean had been sitting just minutes earlier. "Mr. Carson?" A production assistant appeared in the doorway. "We're wrapping up. Do you need anything?" "Where's Dean?" "Mr. Martin? He's in the green room, I think, getting his things. Tell him I'd like to see him, privately." The assistant hesitated. It was unusual for Johnny to request post-show meetings. He was famously private, famously distant from his guests once the cameras stopped rolling. But something in Johnny's voice made the assistant nod quickly and disappear. 5 minutes later, Dean Martin walked back onto the darkened stage, a cigarette dangling from his lips and his coat draped over his arm. "Johnny, what's up? I've got a car waiting." "Sit down, please." Something in Johnny's voice made Dean pause. He studied the host for a moment. The tightness around the eyes, the forced casualness, the way Johnny's hands were gripping the edge of the desk just a little too hard. Dean recognized that look. He'd seen it in mirrors for 40 years. He sat down in the guest chair, the same one he'd occupied during the show, but the energy was completely different now. No audience, no cameras, no performance required. Just two men in an empty room. "What's going on, Johnny?" Johnny was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of the confident, bantering tone that had made him the king of late night. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Look happy." Johnny's voice cracked slightly on the word. "You walk out there every time and you look like you don't have a care in the world. Like everything is easy. Like life is just one long party and you're the guest of honor." Dean didn't respond immediately. He took a drag of his cigarette, watching the smoke curl toward the darkened ceiling. "Is that what it looks like from out here?" "That's what it looks like to everyone. That's the Dean Martin brand, isn't it? The guy who floats through life. The guy who doesn't take anything seriously. The guy who's never had a bad day in his life. And you want to know the secret? I want to know how to do it." Johnny's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I can't, Dean. I walk out there every night and I smile and I make jokes and I pretend everything is fine. But when the cameras stop, when the audience goes home, when I'm sitting in my house at 3 in the morning." He stopped, unable to continue. Dean watched him carefully. Johnny Carson was the most successful man in television. He had fame, money, influence. He had a beautiful wife and a career that most people would kill for. And he was sitting in an empty studio, asking Dean Martin how to be happy. "How long has it been like this?" Dean asked quietly. "Always. My whole life." Johnny laughed bitterly. "Isn't that pathetic? The man who makes America laugh can't figure out how to make himself smile." "It's not pathetic. It's human. It's exhausting." Johnny rubbed his eyes. "I've tried everything. Therapy, alcohol, women, work. I throw myself into the show because it's the only time I don't have to think about how empty everything feels. But then the show ends, and I'm back where I started. Alone. Hollow. Wondering what the point of any of it is." Dean was silent for a long moment. The cigarette burned down between his fingers, ash falling unnoticed onto the stage floor. "You want to know how I do it," Dean said finally. "How I look happy all the time." "Yes. The truth is I don't. I'm not happy, Johnny. I've never been happy. Not really. Not in the way people think. Johnny looked up, surprised. But you always seem... I seem. That's the key word. I seem happy because I've been performing Happiness for 50 years. It's the longest-running show in my career. Dean's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. The drunk act, the lazy smile, the nothing-bothers-me attitude, it's all a character. A role I play because the alternative is too painful. The alternative? Being real. Letting people see what's actually inside. Dean stubbed out his cigarette. I grew up poor, Johnny. Italian kid in a steel town in Ohio. My father barely spoke English. We had nothing. And I learned early that if I smiled, if I made people laugh, if I pretended everything was fine, they'd leave me alone. They wouldn't see the scared kid underneath. Johnny was listening intently, his own pain temporarily forgotten. So I built a character, Dean continued. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the guy who doesn't care about anything. And I've been hiding inside that character ever since. Because Dean Martin can't be hurt. Dean Martin doesn't have feelings deep enough to wound. Dean Martin just floats through life untouchable. But that's not real. No, it's not. And that's the price. Dean leaned back in his chair. The character protects me, but it also imprisons me. I've been married 3 times, Johnny. 3 women who tried to love me, and I pushed every single one of them away. Because letting them in would mean taking off the mask. And I can't do that. I don't even know if there's anything underneath anymore. The silence between them was heavy, intimate. 2 men, both masters of performance, both trapped inside the characters they'd created. So what's the answer? Johnny asked. If you're not actually happy, and I'm not actually happy, what's the point of any of it? Dean thought about the question. It deserved a real answer, not the glib deflection he would have offered on camera. I don't think happiness is the point, he said finally. Then what is? Moments, small ones. A song that hits right, a joke that lands, a sunset, a good meal, the laugh of someone you care about. Dean's voice softened. I stopped chasing happiness a long time ago, Johnny. It's a trap. The more you pursue it, the further it runs. So I stopped pursuing. I started looking for something smaller, something more manageable. What? Peace. Not happiness. Peace. The ability to sit in a room alone and not want to crawl out of your skin. The ability to look in the mirror and not hate what you see. The ability to get through a day without the darkness swallowing you whole. Johnny was quiet, absorbing this. And have you found it? Peace? Sometimes. Not always. Some days are still hard. Some nights are still endless. Dean looked at Johnny with unexpected intensity. But I've learned to stop expecting myself to be happy all the time. I've learned to accept the darkness as part of the package. And somehow that acceptance made things a little easier. That sounds like giving up. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just realistic. Dean shrugged. We've both been in this business long enough to know that the people who look the happiest are usually the most miserable. Marilyn, Judy, all those shining stars who burned so bright and then burned out. They were chasing something that didn't exist, a feeling that couldn't be sustained. Johnny nodded slowly. He thought about the people he'd known, the performers who had sat in that very chair and sparkled for the cameras, only to disappear into addiction, depression, suicide. The gap between the public persona and the private, pain was an ocean, and most people drowned in it. So what do you do? Johnny asked. When the darkness comes, when you're sitting alone at 3 a.m. and nothing makes sense. Dean was quiet for a moment, genuinely considering the question. I watch old westerns, he said. John Wayne, Gary Cooper, stories where the good guys win and the bad guys lose and everything makes sense by the end. It's not real, but it's comforting. It reminds me that there's still a version of the world where things work out. That's it? Old westerns? That's my thing. Yours might be different. Dean leaned forward. The point is having something, a ritual, a comfort, something that reminds you that the darkness isn't all there is. even when it feels like it is. Johnny thought about his own rituals, the drinking that was becoming a problem, the women who came and went like seasons, the work that consumed him because the alternative was sitting with his own thoughts. "My rituals are destroying me," Johnny admitted. "Then find new ones. Better ones." Dean's voice was gentle. "I'm not a wise man, Johnny. I don't have answers. But I know one thing. You can't outrun the darkness. You can only learn to live beside it. Make peace with it. Accept that it's part of you and stop treating it like an enemy to be defeated." That sounds impossible. It's not. It's just hard and slow, and there are setbacks. Dean paused. "But you're still here. After everything, the fame, the pressure, the emptiness, you're still showing up every night. You're still making people laugh. That counts for something." "Does it?" "More than you know." Dean's voice was firm. "Those 30 million people watching every night, how many of them are sitting alone feeling the same way you feel? How many of them are holding on because Johnny Carson makes them laugh? Because for 1 hour, the world seems a little less dark?" Johnny hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so consumed by his own pain that he'd forgotten the impact he had on others. "You're telling me to focus on other people instead of myself?" "I'm telling you that helping others is sometimes the only way to help yourself. When I'm on stage making someone laugh, I forget my own problems for a moment. I'm outside myself. And that's a relief." Dean smiled slightly. "Maybe that's why we do this. Not for the fame or the money, but for those moments when we're not trapped inside our own heads." They sat in silence for a while, two kings of entertainment sharing a vulnerability they'd never shown the public. The empty studio felt less cold now, less lonely. "Can I tell you something?" Johnny said finally. "Anything. I've interviewed thousands of people on this show. Presidents, movie stars, athletes, geniuses. And this," he gestured at the space between them, "this is the most honest conversation I've ever had. Probably because there's no audience, no cameras, no pressure to be entertaining." Dean stood up, reaching for his coat. "That's the trap, Johnny. We spend so much time performing that we forget how to be real, and then we wonder why we feel empty. How do I stop? How do I learn to be real again?" Dean paused at the edge of the stage, looking back at Johnny still sitting behind his desk. "Find one person. Just one. Someone you can be yourself with. Someone you don't have to perform for." His voice was quiet. "I never found that person. I was too scared, too protected. But you're smarter than me, Johnny. You still have time. Did you ever want to? Find that person. Every day. Every single day." Dean's voice carried a sadness that he rarely let show. "But the mask fused to my face a long time ago. I'm not sure I could take it off even if I wanted to." He started to walk away, then stopped. "Johnny." "Yeah?" "The darkness you feel, it's not a weakness. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's just the price we pay for seeing the world clearly." Dean's eyes met Johnny's. "The happiest people I know are the ones who don't think too much, the ones who can float through life without questioning any of it. That's not us. We think, we feel, we see too much, and that's painful. But it's also what makes us good at what we do. Being miserable makes us better entertainers? Understanding misery does. Knowing what it feels like to be alone, to be scared, to be desperate for connection, that's what lets us reach people. That's what makes them trust us." Dean smiled slightly. "The darkness isn't your enemy, Johnny. It's your gift. You just have to learn how to carry it." He walked off the stage, leaving Johnny alone in the empty studio. Johnny sat there for a long time after Dean left. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was contemplative. Something had shifted. Not a solution, not a cure, but a different way of seeing. The darkness wasn't something to be defeated. It was something to be accepted, carried, transformed into something that could help others. He thought about the millions of people who watched his show every night. How many of them were sitting alone, fighting their own battles, holding on by a thread? And how many of them felt a little less alone because Johnny Carson was there, making them laugh, helping them forget their troubles for an hour? Maybe that was enough. Not happiness. That was a myth. But purpose. Connection. The knowledge that his struggle meant something, even if only to strangers he'd never meet. Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show for another 20 years. He never spoke publicly about his depression, never revealed the battles he fought in private. But those who knew him noticed something different after that night in 1972. A slight softening, a willingness to be more present, more real, even when the cameras were rolling. He kept a note in his desk drawer, scribbled on a Tonight Show napkin the night Dean left. Just a few words, a reminder for the bad days. The darkness isn't your enemy. It's your gift. Learn to carry it. When Johnny died in 2005, his son found the note among his personal effects. The napkin was worn and faded, clearly handled many times over the years. A reminder that Johnny had returned to again and again in the 3 a.m. hours when the darkness came calling. Dean Martin never knew about the note. He never knew that his words had become a lifeline for one of the most successful men in television. He died in 1995, alone in his Beverly Hills home, still wearing the mask he'd put on 50 years earlier. But for one night in 1972 in an empty studio, two men had been real with each other. They'd shared the weight they both carried. They'd admitted that the smiles were performances, and the happiness was an illusion. And in that admission, they'd found something rare, the knowledge that they weren't alone. That somewhere out there, someone else understood what it was like to make millions laugh while dying inside. That's not happiness. It's not a cure. But it's something. And sometimes something is enough to keep you going.